Hey guys, before the video starts, I want to quickly mention that I'm doing a Metroid Prime related giveaway. If you're interested in that, stay tuned until the end of the video. Nintendo Shoutout dropped a remaster of Metroid Prime for the Nintendo Switch yesterday, so if you've ever been curious about this game, now is the perfect time to give it a try. If you watch anyone's list of the best GameCube games, you're going to see Metroid Prime on it and likely at the top spot. This is a massive accolade considering the absolute banger titles on the GameCube. So the question is Metroid Prime really that great? Well, yes, but it's also a bit subjective. Although my award for the greatest GameCube game would go to The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker, my opinion is a little bit skewed because I didn't play Metroid Prime for the first time until fairly recently. Although Metroid Prime is still an excellent game that has aged quite well, I believe something that heavily impacts its legacy is the innovation the game brought to the series at the time of release. Metroid is one of those franchises that a lot of non-gamers aren't too familiar with. When most people think about Nintendo's legendary first-party titles, Mario and Zelda are the games that come to mind, while Metroid is often left in the dust. This is pretty ironic because Metroid is a very special franchise in the sense that there has literally never been a bad Metroid game. Even the less favored Metroid titles are still incredible games on their own, and this super high standard is probably one of the reasons Nintendo doesn't release Metroid games very often. There is so much pressure to create the perfect game for Metroid fans, and anything less than perfect won't cut it. A clear example of this is Nintendo announcing Metroid Prime 4 being well into the development cycle in 2017, only to completely restart the development in 2019 with Retro Studios back on board. Rumors of Metroid Dread can be traced back to 2005, and that game ended up coming out a whole 16 years later in 2021. So clearly, Nintendo likes to take their time making these games to the best of their abilities. But I'll be totally honest here, if Samus wasn't my longtime main in Super Smash Bros., I'm not sure I'd even know much about the franchise at all. Earlier, I mentioned the innovation brought by Metroid Prime when originally released for the GameCube in 2002, and when I say innovation, I really mean that. This does not look like a game from 21 years ago. Even playing the non-remastered version for the GameCube, this looks and feels like a game from just a few years ago. Once in a while, a game comes along that's so far ahead of its time, it literally blows people's minds. And in this case, that game is Metroid Prime. 2002 was a weird time for gaming. It was the start of the 6th generation of consoles' life cycles, and some developers were much quicker nailing the advanced 3D graphics than others. Retro Studios was one of those developers that was able to hit it out of the park. Before Metroid Prime, Metroid was exclusively a side-scrolling Castlevania-style game. The series has always been known for a few staples: tight controls, freedom of exploration, challenging boss fights, and backtracking in a way that doesn't feel annoying. In Metroid games, you often find doors and upgrades early on that are locked until you find other upgrades later in the game. It sounds tedious to go back every time you discover something new, but Nintendo has always done such an excellent job of making it exciting to go back and see what was hiding right in front of you the whole time. How all of these mechanics would translate to 3D was what most people were unsure of before Metroid Prime. Rarely do you see a franchise completely change the style of a game while still achieving massive success. Metroid Prime's development actually began for the Nintendo 64. The Nintendo 64 actually has a strange fact of being one of the only Nintendo consoles to never see a Metroid release, but this makes sense after playing Metroid Prime. Although the Nintendo 64 was one of my favorite consoles of all time, it just wasn't nearly powerful enough to meet the vision Retro Studios and Nintendo had for Metroid Prime. For some perspective, first-person shooters on the Nintendo 64 looked like this. When Metroid Prime released, not only did it blow people away by perfectly carrying those previously mentioned Metroid staples to a 3D world, but it also used an incredibly innovative and satisfying control scheme, taking a more run-and-gun approach than your typical first-person shooters. This was long before the release of mainstream first-person shooters like Call of Duty Modern Warfare, so Retro Studios didn't have a lot to go off of, and with the GameCube having a C-stick rather than the two full joysticks we always see on controllers now, the developers did a fantastic job of not making this feel like a limitation. The lock-on mechanic just feels right when sprinting around. I'd argue that these controls are a big part of what gives Prime its unique feel, and I'm glad you get to choose between the original or modern controls on the Switch remaster. Although I missed out on the real innovation Metroid Prime brought back in 2002, a part of me is glad I only played it for the first time recently because this game is hard, and I mean very hard. Some of the battles are difficult, but luckily Dark Souls prepared me for that. It's the puzzles throughout the game that will drive you completely mad if you're not prepared. Multiple times, I found myself completely stuck until resorting to a walkthrough, only to feel like a complete idiot afterwards. This is not a complaint though, because once you do figure out the solution, you're usually left with a smirk rather than frustration. So is Metroid Prime really great? Is it worth picking up the remaster on the Switch? Well, the game was pretty revolutionary and holds up really well. If you enjoy modern fast-paced run-and-gun shooters like Doom Eternal, love challenging puzzles that require maximum effort from your brain, and enjoy larger-than-life visuals and boss fights, this is a game for you. I'll be buying the physical copy when it releases on the Switch on February 22nd. Something to also be aware of is this game has 2 fantastic sequels that I'm pretty sure will be remastered soon as well, so if you happen to love the first game, there's more where that came from. Every time I review a retro video game, I do a giveaway at the end of the video. This time, instead of giving away a copy of the game, I'll be giving away the official game guide. If you're like me and you want to avoid using walkthroughs, but also don't like being stuck at a spot for hours on end, you'll need this. Giveaway details are in the description. Thank you all so much for watching. Take care.